record button. There we go. All right, well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our Silicon Valley Clean Energy Board of Directors meeting for December. I would like to call the meeting to order at 7 p.m. and I'll go ahead and read the COVID message. This meeting will be conducted in accordance with California Government Code Section 54953E in consideration of the coronavirus COVID-19. All members of the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Board of Directors and staff will participate in this meeting by teleconference. Members of the public may observe this meeting electronically by accessing the meeting via instructions on the agenda. Public comments sent in advance of the meeting will be read within the public comment period or the applicable agenda item. The public will also have an opportunity to provide comments during that meeting. Members of the public using Zoom may comment during public comment or the applicable agenda item by using the raise hand feature, and you will be recognized by the chair. Those using the telephone feature should press *9 on your phones to initiate the raise hand function in Zoom. You will then be announced unmuted and your time to speak will begin. The public may provide comments on any matter listed on the agenda. Speakers are customarily limited to 3 minutes each. However, the board chair may increase or decrease the time allotted to each speaker based on the number of speakers, the length of the agenda, and the complexity of the subject matter. Speaking time will not be decreased to less than 1 minute. And with that, could we get a roll call, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Chair Abikoga.
Here.
Vice Chair Gibbons.
Here.
Directors Willie.
Here.
Armendariz. Meadows.
Here.
Tyson.
Here.
Rennie.
Here.
Chua. Elahi.
Here.
Martinez Beltran.
Here.
Walia.
Here.
Larson.
Here.
Ellenberg.
Here.
Chair, we have a quorum. At this time, we have Director Armendariz and Chua absent.
Great, thank you. And I'd like to welcome Council Member Sally Meadows from Los Altos. I believe this is your first meeting.
Thank you.
Welcome and thank you for joining us.
I'm actually Vice Mayor Meadows now since last month. Just hot off the presses.
Excuse me for that. Vice Mayor.
No worries.
Vice Mayor Meadows. And
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us. All right, we will go on to public comment on matters not listed on the agenda. Are there any members of the public wishing to speak on a non-agendized item? If you're in the attendee box, please press your raise hand button. If you're on the phone, please hit *9. And I don't see any hands. Clerk, were there any messages received earlier today?
There were none, Chair Abikoga.
Okay, great. I will close public comment and we will move on now to the consent calendar. These items, item 1A through 1G will be taken in one vote unless are there any board members wishing to pull an item or speak to any of the items? I don't see any hands. Let me go to the public. Are there any members of the public wishing to comment on a consent calendar item? I don't see any hands. Were there any public comment received earlier today? Clerk Roberts.
Not specifically on the consent calendar or any matters not on the agenda.
Okay, great. Thank you. With that, I'd be happy to entertain a motion and a second on the consent calendar. Yes, Vice Chair Gibbons.
I move consent calendar.
Thank you. And Director Larson.
I second.
Motion by Vice Chair Gibbons, second by Director Larson. Is there any other discussion? Vice Chair Gibbons, do you have any comments? Your hand is still up. No, okay. With that, then could we get a roll call vote, please?
Yes, Chair Abikoga.
Aye.
Vice Chair Gibbons.
Aye.
Director Willie.
Aye.
Meadows.
Aye.
Tyson.
Yes.
Rennie.
Aye.
Elahi.
Aye.
Martinez Beltran.
Aye.
Walia,
Aye.
Larson,
Aye.
Hillenberg.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Thank you. We will go to the regular calendar, and item 2 is our CEO report with our CEO Girish Balachandran.
Thank you, Chair Abikoga, members of the SVCE board. I have 5 items I'd like to provide you an update on. First, I'd like to introduce our newest SVCE team member. That's Oren Weiner. He's our new Power Resources Manager reporting to Monica Padilla. Oren is going to introduce himself to you. Oren?
Thank you, Girish. Good evening, everyone. My name is Oren Weiner. I am recently joining from City of Pasadena as the new Power Resources Manager over here at SVCE. I'm really excited to be here. And prior to that, I worked in the investor-owned utility side at both Sempra Energy and NextEra Energy. So really excited to join SVCE on this decarbonization journey. And thanks for having me.
Very happy to have Oren, and Monica is also very happy that she has a full complement of staff, and we all appreciate the board's support in encouraging us and providing us the resources to have a great team in place. Second item, I want to recognize Dorothy, who has provided great service to us during the period that Andrea was not here. Dorothy has quite a bit of experience in being a board clerk, and we really enjoyed our time with her. So Dorothy, thank you very much for your service, and today will be her last meeting with us.
Well, thank you so much, Girish. And I've got to say, it has been a true pleasure. First of all, I was telling Kevin before the meeting, it's great to have Andrea back. She does a fantastic job. She's a wonderful clerk and a delightful person. And so it's been my pleasure to take over for a short time. Some of the adjectives I've heard, such as great and fantastic, I think are a little overblown, but I'll take them anyway. And it's been a great experience. I've learned a lot and made some new friends. So thank you.
Thank you. Next, I want to recognize someone who's not on camera today, but she's back today and this week, and that's Andrea Paisano, our board clerk and executive assistant extraordinaire. I am overblown in adjectives, but maybe it fits here. So welcome back, Andrea, to the board. So I'm going to take this opportunity to also recognize 2 other people, including Andrea. Andrea, you can get back onto camera. So just in the last 10 days, we are celebrating the 5-year anniversary of 3 of our star employees. That's Andrea, Pamela Leonard, and Don Bray. Just amazing employees, 5 years of great service to SVCE. Cannot thank them enough. And so just a round of applause to the great team members here. Third, my 4th item.
Just for clarification, these are the founder members. I think is SVC been around
Yeah,
for 5 years?
they are employees number 2, 3, and 5.
Wonderful. Congratulations.
Yeah, just great. The next item is I wanted to give you a quick update on CC Power, that's California Community Power. When we started California Community Power, the board, we had a lot of discussion, and as part of the discussion, we had said that we will provide a monthly update whenever I attend a board meeting. Notes of the meeting would be provided to our board. So we've been doing that. Additionally, we also said at the end of 1 year, we'll provide kind of a review. So I'm taking an opportunity to provide you where we are with CC Power. We have 10 members. We've issued 2 RFOs. one for long duration storage, and one for firm clean resources recently. The last year, we've spent a lot on creating infrastructure, like the basic agreements of how CC Power works and how risk is shared between the different participants in a project. It's the first time that it's been done, so a lot of time has been spent on it. We also spent quite a bit of time with some advocacy organizations representing labor, the environment, and environmental justice, which actually caused a lot of churn within CC Power. Definitely lessons learned from that, but that did take up quite a bit of time of the CC Power board. Right now, where we are is we are in a bit of a cusp where we are in the last stages of the long duration storage contract. And in a later presentation from Monica, you'll learn all the different changes that have happened in the last year that have been also CC Power has been subject to. So we hope to get a contract to you in January, and we're keeping our fingers crossed for that. That would be the first contract from CC Power. At the same time, we are looking at what CC Power can do in the future. I have to say that maybe my expectation on day one when we created it versus where we are today, we probably have not met that expectation for a variety of reasons. Some of it is situational, some of it self-inflicted, some of it is like what I told you, some of the advocate kind of work was just very distracting. So it's a combination of reasons, all very good lessons learned. Again, we're starting off something new with 10 different CCAs from across the state. So that's kind of an update on CC Power. I'd be happy to take any questions from the board, and if it gets a little bit more in detail, we can always agendize it for a future meeting as a separate item. The last item before I stop and be open for questions is to tell you thank you very much for your feedback at the last board meeting on the doubling down strategy that Justin presented. All of you participated in providing us feedback. We've collected all that feedback and categorized it. And so you will be getting that feedback. We put it in a set of notes. So you'll receive the notes through an email, either tomorrow or the day after from Justin Zagunis. So you'll get to see all the feedback there. And then we'll come back in February with more of an operational plan. But once you see the notes, if there are things that you want to add, please do reach out to Justin or myself. So I just want to give you a heads up that those notes will be coming your way. That's all I have, Chair Abekoga, on my report. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Girish. Are there any questions from our board? Don't see any hands. Let me open this up to the public. Are there any members of the public wishing to comment on the CEO's report? Please raise your hand or press *9 if you're on the phone. I don't see any. Were there any comments received earlier today, Clerk Roberts?
There were none, Chair.
Thank you. I just want to also welcome Oren. I had a chance to meet him in person earlier today. It's great to have you. Welcome aboard. And thank you, Dorothy. It's really been a pleasure to have you with us and filling in, and just really appreciate your positive energy and just your calm demeanor. It's just really been a delight to have you with us, and I hope that we can call upon you again if we need your assistance, and we wish you the best, and hope you keep in touch with us. And congratulations to our 5-year employees, Andrea, Pamela, and Dawn. They've been here longer than me, actually, but it's really exciting. It's kind of hard to believe it's been 5 years, but thank you very much for all of your work and your enthusiasm and your talents, and you've really helped help build this organization to what it is. So thank you very much on behalf of the board. With that, thank you, Girish, for your report. We will move on to item 3, which is the Clean Energy Procurement Informational Update. And we have a presentation by Director of Power Resources, Monica Padilla.
So Chair, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to just introduce this
Yes.
topic for just a minute.
Great.
Power supply, we spend 90 cents of every dollar is spent on power supply. And the grid is changing from the day we started SVC to now. Things have changed in terms of policy and regulation and where we are headed as a state in terms of our power system. So it behooves us to educate the board because it's 90 cents of every dollar is power supply. You really need to know what's happening as of today and what's changed and what's coming up next. And we have a 1 to 2 decade runway to transform the grid into a completely clean grid. And all the pathways are not super clear yet. At the same time, what we've done in terms of calling ourselves and being 100% carbon-free CCA, those definitions are changing. So those are the kinds of things we first need to educate you on, and then look at different options and pathways of how we continue to stay on the cutting edge of clean energy while still being reliable and affordable. So things have changed. And so one of the things we wanted to do is give you frequent updates, but maybe even have workshops once a year where we can go over this in more detail. So we are planning workshops in February and March to both go through a lot of education, not just for the new board members we may have, but for all existing board members and alternates, because the system has changed and you really need to know where we are and where we are headed. So today's meeting, it's part of Monica's presentation. I hope we'll have a lot of discussion and questions, and we'll be listening so that we can design what the workshops look like. You may have one or more of you may have specific questions that you may want a briefing one-on-one. We'd be happy to do that. So I think it's a fascinating presentation. So with that, not setting the bar too high for Monica, but I'm going to hand it over to her to make the presentation.
All right. Well, thank you, Girish, for that introduction. I hope I can wow you. That was wowy. As we pull this up, as we can go to the next slide. So as Girish mentioned, this is purely informational, hoping to set the stage for kind of where we think things might be going in the future. Take a little bit of a walk in memory lane to kind of talk about how we got to where we are, some of the challenges that we're facing with respect to procurement orders that are being put on all of the load serving entities by the California Public Utility Commission to meet reliability. Talk about a little bit about reliability in the context of resource adequacy and reform that's happening. I think we went backwards. Yeah, and I provide you just a quick update on our efforts to implement long-term power purchase agreements for clean resources. And then, as Girish mentioned, kind of leave you with some questions, some prompts on things that we'll want to talk about in the coming months and maybe even the coming years on how we're going to achieve kind of the carbon-free grid of the future of 2045. And so with that, again, this is just intended to provide you some context and information and start the discussion. Next slide. And feel free to interrupt me, I guess, at any time if that helps you. So since we started, and I don't have all the historical information on this graph here, but since we started SVCE back in 2017, we have been procuring clean resources, whether they be renewable portfolio standard eligible resources such as solar or wind, or non-RPS, but carbon-free resources such as large hydro. And so the board and the community have set a goal for us to be essentially 100% carbon-free measured on an annual basis with the fairly aggressive renewable portfolio standard, or RPS standard. And so if you see here on the chart, the bottom line that says SB 100, that's the state mandated RPS requirement. So essentially it's about 35% RPS in 2021. Whereas the top or the middle line here that says SVC RPS policy, that is the board directed standard for us. And so it's roughly 50% RPS now, growing to about 60, 62% in 2030. So our policy has been to be more aggressive than the state mandated requirement. And we have been able to achieve our internal policy or board directed policy since we started SVCE through the procurement of short-term RPS resources. We call them PCC1, short-term PCC1 resources. And these resources are coming from existing facilities, either owned by PG&E, by SoCal Edison, or by other marketers in California. We buy these resources for them, we get to count the attributes, and we get to retire them on behalf of our community. So that's all going to change though, because going forward, much of our RPS will be met through contracts under long-term power purchase agreements, or PPAs. And so this is done for two reasons. One, because the state has required that all load serving entities, including CCAs such as ours, procure a minimum of 65% of their RPS through long-term contracts of 10 years or greater. And so we have met that SB 350 requirement for long-term procurement requirements, and we've gone beyond that. And we've gone beyond that because a lot of times these long-term PPAs just make more economic sense than buying short-term products. We can enter into a long-term contract for renewables that are significantly cheaper than buying contracts year to year, and that's why we've done it. Plus, our board, while it's not a specific policy, has a directive to add new capacity to the grid. And so the way you get that is by signing these long-term PPAs and working with developers to finance these new types of projects. So just a couple of things to highlight here. 2021, we still have quite a bit of these short-term resources as shown in the kind of light green color. But this is the year that we started to actually bring on our first PPAs. Unfortunately, they're not coming on until the very end of the year. So for all intents and purposes, really, it's 2021 is being met with short-term resources. In 2022, however, we'll have a large portion of our renewables being met through long-term PPAs. And by 2024, 60% of our load needs will be met through long-term RPS resources. So that's quite a significant change from where we were this year and where we were when we started in 2017 when we had 0% coming from that. But that said, we'll go to the next slide. Our goal again is to be 100% clean, measured on an annual basis. And so while the RPS resources will get us to a significant portion of our target, it doesn't get us to 100% clean. So we have to buy these other types of resources or seek allocations from PG&E, which we have been able to do for 2020 and 2021. So for those of you that have been here for a while, you know that we've had a long standing policy of procuring large hydro resources, both from California and the Northwest. And when we first started SVCE, those resources were priced at a fairly competitive and reasonable rate. And those resources were, I wouldn't say in abundance, but they were easily available for us to procure. With all the CCAs that have entered the market that also have really high clean goals, those resources have, the availability has diminished. Plus, prolonged droughts have made it even more difficult for us to acquire these resources and to acquire them in a cost-effective way. So we have to look at that as being more the norm than the exception, and try to find more sustainable ways to meet our 100% clean goal if we choose to keep that as a goal going forward at SVCE. So fortunate for us, through the efforts of Cal CCA and several of the CCAs and the decision by the CPUC, we have been able to secure allocations from PG&E for both large hydro and at the board's direction for nuclear. And those resources we expect will continue to be available to us so long as those resources are online, but there's never a guarantee on what we'll get. And this bar here, or this graph here, shows you theoretically what our overall clean position would be if we had all our PPAs come online, in addition to one midterm carbon-free procurement that we did earlier this year, plus if we were to get the PG&E allocations for nuclear and large hydro, which are in the kind of the more patterned lines here or chart stacks here. So again, those aren't guaranteed, and you can see that the nuclear actually drops after 2025 because that's when the nuclear facilities go offline completely. But what that means is we still have quite a bit of white space here, quite a bit of gap between where our long-term PPAs will be and what our 100% carbon-free needs are. And this again is measured on an annual basis. This does not mean that every hour of the day or even every day of the year or every month of the year, we have 100% clean energy to meet our energy demands. And this is something that, again, to Girish's point, as we think about how are we going to move past 2030 or get to 2045, 100% clean, what does that standard look like? Should we be procuring to a 24/7 kind of standard? Should we be procuring to something like a monthly, or is an annual measurement good enough for what we're trying to do here at SVCE? And so those are discussions that I think we're going to be having next year with the board. Can we go to the next slide? So the other thing we wanted to highlight here is that while we are a local agency and we have local control to some extent, we still operate as a regulated entity under the California Public Utility Commission. And as such, the CPUC can order us to do certain types of procurement. And they make these procurement orders through a process called the Integrated Resource Planning process. And in the last IRP process, they identified, which was the 2020 IRP, they identified a significant gap between what the load serving entities were procuring or were planning to procure and what was needed to be to ensure that the grid was reliable. And this was also in conjunction with the closing of several once-through pooling natural gas resources in California, and again with the closure of Diablo Canyon. So they saw a gap, and that gap essentially led to a procurement order, and this is now called the Midterm Reliability Procurement Order, otherwise known as the Diablo Canyon Replacement Order. And so I mentioned this at a couple of board meetings, but essentially what it's directed us being all the LSCs that are under CPUC jurisdiction, what it's directed us to do is procure 11.5 gigawatts of new capacity, not existing capacity, so new, still in the ground, by 2026. So that's a lot of capacity if you think about where the state is in total. Of that requirement, 237 megawatts is SVCE's obligation. And so to put it into perspective, our peak capacity, which happens for us in September, is about 850 megawatts. So they're ordering us to buy 237 megawatts of capacity. Fortunately for us, some of the new PPAs that we've signed in the last year will actually count towards this procurement obligation, but not all of them. And so our net obligation is roughly 180 megawatts. And so the types of resources that they're ordering to be procured through this effort include a couple of carve-outs, including some for long duration storage, some from geothermal, some from what they call net zero resources, clean resources, otherwise known as solar plus storage, and then basically anything else. But because of the rules that they put in place requiring that the resources be clean, a huge D-rate on the capacity factor for resources, it essentially means that a large part of this is going to have to be met either from additional solar plus storage or standalone storage. And so what this graph shows here is if we had all our PPAs in place that we've executed, we have the carbon-free midterm resources that we've procured, we get the PG&E allocations to persist through 2030. Again, that's not a guarantee. And we meet the midterm reliability procurement requirements. This shows you how much resources we have relative to our load through 2030. So it essentially amounts to about an additional 20% of clean resources would have to be procured by 2026 to 2030, essentially. And so that would bring our overall clean position in 2030 to roughly, I think it's 80% or 85%. For some reason, I can't see the bottom of my screen here. So that's quite 85% on an annual basis. So that's a lot of clean resources and really closing that gap on an annual basis and helping us meet that clean goal. Next slide.
Excuse me. Sorry, Monica.
Sure.
Let me just interrupt a little bit here. Why don't we go back to the previous slide and just stop to ask if there are questions, because there's a lot
Sure.
that we covered in the last 3 slides. So maybe we'll just hesitate for a moment and ask for questions.
Director Lahi.
Yeah, it's quite a confusing, complex problem that you have. There's also a lot of rooftop solar and in-house solar that's being built, and I don't know if that's accelerating or if it's going at a very slow pace. Does that change the load forecast that's required, or is that already assumed? And this is what's going to be left after everybody's put solar on their houses?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the load forecast, which is the top blue line on this graph here, is the load forecast that is basically handed down to us from the California Energy Commission. They undergo an annual process where they develop a load forecast for planning purposes for the state. Their load forecast includes behind the meter resources, including rooftop solar. So this load forecast is flat because we have so much load, so much solar penetration, rooftop solar penetration happening in California. In addition to that, we're also trying to understand from our own perspective, more from a bottom-up approach, what we think the impacts of rooftop solars are going to be in our community and what the impacts of other electrification measures might be in our community as well. And so that's an effort we're undertaking in-house to understand that better.
Yeah, so as I understand it, I guess the load forecast would be going up because as the population grows, more electricity and everything else will be used. But it's flat because they're assuming that the rooftops will cover that. And it's I guess the question is for us, if we encourage more rooftops, is that something that would help us out by subsidizing or doing whatever else that maybe needs to be done, so we don't have to chase resources that would be harder and harder to find?
Yeah, the acceleration or increased penetration of solar rooftops in our community doesn't solve all of our problems, because just like our utility scale solar projects, the solar energy or the clean energy doesn't generate electricity in every hour of the day. So we still have a need to procure resources to meet our demands in all the other hours of the day. So we can't just eliminate our load through rooftop or behind the meter resources. I think that would be a lot of solar, and may make a little bit of a difference here, but not significant difference.
Yeah, and that was my question. Could we have a significant impact if we really heavily start subsidizing solar rooftops? Would that be cheaper than going out and buying solar resources outside?
Not cheaper, and it wouldn't be consistent with our procurement mandates. Our procurement mandates are specifically for certain types of resources, and there's limits on how much you can do behind the meter.
And that's procurement mandate set by the board here or by the
by the
PUC?
California Public Utility Commission.
Okay, thank you.
Director Tyson?
Thank you. I think I understand from Director Elahi's question that the load forecast is level to sort of to account for the fact of growth of rooftop solar causing that. And I'm approaching this from the other direction to say, you know, I attended a conference last week, and our CEO was a moderator of decarbonization now kind of thing. And I'm thinking, well, what if we're successful? The impetus is so strong on us to say by 2030, what if we are more successful than we expect in building decarbonization? What if we're more successful in terms of transportation decarbonization? And I just picture that we should be factoring in the fact this load forecast really should be increasing no matter what. And how are we going to climb this hill? And the second, so it's more of an observation, I guess, now that I understand the situation in this chart. But the second thing here is we're putting so many of our eggs in this solar basket, and I look at that wind number. I understand hydro, big hydro, that's tapped out. I understand geothermal is probably largely tapped out. It's not going to be a big factor, but I don't see any growth really in wind in this chart. Are we so really pessimistic that we can't develop significant wind energy sources in this kind of time frame?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the way that the midterm reliability procurement order treats wind, it really discounts the capacity associated with wind that you could use to count towards this requirement. And so while you may be able to, say, develop 100 megawatts of wind, for this particular procurement requirement, you'll only be able to count 30 megawatts of it. And that's because there's just, you know, the wind, while it's a good resource to have that complements solar, especially if it's coming from out of state, there are limitations on its ability to provide energy in all hours of the day. And so that's why it's heavily discounted. We have two essentially existing wind resources in our portfolio now. And the last 3 years when we've gone out to procure long-term resources to meet our RPS requirements, we've been surprised at the lack of wind resources that are being offered into our RFPs, especially for new wind. And so I think the state of California is hoping that the wind will come to California, but the wind can only come to California if the transmission is available for it to come to California. I think that's the big kind of hurdle right now, is building that transmission infrastructure to be able to enable these wind projects to deliver to California. And so I think that maybe in a couple of years, this graph might look a little different if those transmission resources are built out. And there's also a lot of talk about offshore wind. And in California, offshore wind is a little bit different than developing an offshore wind on the East Coast, because we have a very deep shelf. So it's called deep. It's a more expensive and complicated resource to develop here. But there's a lot of interest both from the load serving entities and from the state of California to really try to expand those resources. But I don't think it's a by 2030 resource. I think it's a beyond 2030 resource.
Okay, thank you. That's a really helpful answer and helps my understanding. And I also appreciate the challenges of these things, but also the fact is that it's not just the actual value of the loads that are created, it's how they're counted in this formula that we have to meet. So in terms of the load, in terms of the wind and the discount it's provided. So I see that it's a much more complicated equation than I pictured.
Yeah, and solar is even discounted in even more than that, than wind. And so when we put solar in, we have to put solar in with battery, essentially, in order to get any kind of counting capacity from the solar.
Thank you.
Director Rennie?
Sorry, this is going to be a complex question. We're not talking about RA here, right? We're talking about real energy procured, correct?
Yes, with the exception of the standalone storage and the long duration storage. There's really no energy associated with that unless you pair it with the resource.
And where is the standalone storage in this graph?
Yeah, you don't see it in this one because this is just looking at kind of an energy balance. In the
Okay,
other graph, I'll show it to you.
because that was my concern. If if you're trying to replace nuclear, which is a base load that runs 24/7 with yearly accounting of energy, we're basically adding energy in the middle of the day and losing it at night compared to what Diablo Canyon produces. And so we make our duck curve problem worse if we just look at it this way. It needs to also be tied to a long-term storage kind of solution to move this additional energy that we're purchasing to the evening and night hours. And so you're saying that there is something tied to this related to long-term storage to fill out the whole picture for a whole day and not make our duck curve problem worse.
Yeah, in order to address that concern, the midterm reliability procurement order does essentially three things. One, it requires 1,000 megawatts of base load clean resources that have pretty much guaranteed they can operate 24/7. And those can come in the form of geothermal or biomass type resources. And so each of us will have an obligation to procure some of those resources. And here at SBCE, we already procured some of those resources. We have 2 geothermal resources in our portfolio. And so the state is saying we need to do more of that. We have to do new creation of that. They also required 1,000 megawatts of new long duration storage resources. These are storage resources with at least 8 hours of discharge duration. And they'll basically say that those resources have to be available on the grid and ability to generate electricity during certain hours of the day. And so SBCE will also have an obligation for long duration storage. And then last is this requirement to have essentially the way that they've set the rules, you essentially have to pair storage with the resources that you're procuring or do a lot of standalone storage. And while it doesn't have to be long duration storage, it could be 4 hours or 5 hours. The idea is we're going to have so much of this stuff on that we'll be able to stagger it during the hours of the day so that it won't all run at the same time.
And so getting back to sort of Javed's question about incentivizing more rooftop solar, if we incentivize rooftop solar that had its own storage that was controllable by the utility, then that would be more of our 24/7 load forecast reduction versus this annual. So by looking at it this way, it doesn't encourage us to go out and incentivize rooftop plus storage as far as I can see, which seems, again, going back to Javed's idea of should we encourage more rooftop solar? The answer sort of is yes, if it had had storage available with it, particularly controllable storage by the utility. And so there isn't any connection to that here, right?
Yeah, this is an energy accounting graph on an annual basis. I think when we move to resource adequacy, and I have a graph to share on that, you can see kind of how it looks like on an hourly basis and where resources like storage can really help meet our 24/7 needs as well. So maybe we can go to the next slide if that's helpful. Unless, I don't know if anyone has any more questions on this slide. All right, we can go to the next slide.
Yeah, I don't have a question on the slide necessarily, but Director Renee brought up a good point because battery storage, and I'm just trying to do rooftop solar. So of course, they almost discouraged me to get battery storage because they said it wasn't worth it. The cost of the battery storage is so much higher compared to what the benefit you might get out of it. So that might be a place where, not necessarily related to this, we should be looking at incentivizing people to put the battery storage itself if you're going to get to reducing our load requirements.
Yeah, I think rooftop solar alone probably exacerbates our problem that we have with the duck curve. because that is the basis of the duck curve, right? Is that we have that net that kind of our load goes down so much during the afternoon hours, and then it goes up real fast on the hours, when the sun doesn't shine, as the sun's going down, and then ultimately goes down. So adding more solar on rooftops alone doesn't help our problem reliability. Adding it with storage certainly helps because it enables extending that solar energy for another 4 hours or 2 hours, whatever the battery discharge capacity is. So definitely adding storage to solar helps the grid. As far as the economics from a customer's perspective, I can't talk to that because I don't really know what it costs to build one of these things or to put a rooftop solar system on your roof with battery. But I think that the way that the rates are going in California with time of use rates, I think that eventually it'll be set so that it makes sense for you to put storage in with your solar and take advantage of that ability to charge basically the battery for free and then avoid paying higher rates during certain hours of the day. So that's what the time of use rates should go towards if they're not already there.
Yeah, I understand that. I think it's a discussion for another time. So
yeah,
but something to think about, because I think
yeah.
we do need to.
And I think we have to do that, and we have to do all of this. I think it's an and thing that the state would like us to do. We do a bunch of local generation, and we do all this other kind of capacity and build out of resources.
And I would just second what Javed said, is I'm hearing other people discouraged from putting the storage with the rooftop solar in multiple cases. So it says we need to figure out something changed, right? We are kind of going to time of use, yet these salesmen are still discouraging what actually would be helping us.
That's a good thing. I could certainly circle back with Don and his team to see if there's a reason why that's the case and what we could do from a program standpoint to encourage more storage when people pair it with solar. I mean, we have a program that we did an RFP where we've actually acquired, I think, 6 to 7 megawatts of behind the meter solar with storage for resiliency purposes. That'll also help us meet some other requirements that we have in goals. So I think it makes sense from my perspective, from a utility scale, and it makes sense at that level as well. I just don't understand the economics of doing it on individual homes and why it wouldn't make sense. I think maybe there's a conception or perception that homeowners require a very short return on their investment, and maybe that's why they're not pushing it.
I also might suggest looking at how much we're paying for overproduction might have an effect on that lever also. If
you mean the NEM rate, the net energy metering rate?
Yes, I know we're more generous than PG&E, and being more generous may discourage the need to have the time shifting of it to, a more expensive time of the day kind of thing.
Okay. So whereas the last graph that we showed, that I shared, was mostly around our energy and our clean energy goals on an annual basis, this here illustrates what it takes, how our load looks like on a summer day on a 24-hour basis. And so a few things I want to highlight here. First of all, when we talk about reliability and making sure that we have enough resources to meet our reliability requirements in every hour of the day, that kind of structure is what we call resource adequacy. And California has been working under a resource adequacy program and a set of rules for the last, few years, maybe even more than a decade. Because of all the solar that's coming onto the grid, because of all the solar that's being put on rooftops, and all the other renewable resources like wind that are also being integrated into the grid, there's a real need to reform how we account and measure resource adequacy. And so right now, we only look at resource adequacy and we measure it basically one time. We look at our peak capacity for the system, which again happens usually in the summer. And we say, do we have enough capacity, enough steel in the ground to meet our peak demand? And we measure that, using some statistical analysis, and then we add a little bit of what they call a planning reserve margin. So they say, okay, you need to be able to ensure that you have at least 15% more than your peak capacity needs. And so we only have to demonstrate that we have that for every month of the year. And so what we have done at SVC, along with most of the other load serving entities in California, quite frankly, is we've been able to meet that requirement that we have right now through the procurement of essentially natural gas resources. So the graph here on the left side of your screen, and you can see that big brown kind of area in the middle, those are natural gas resources or thermal resources. And so right now what we do is we buy the rights to call on capacity from marketers. They'll sell it to us and they say, okay, I'm going to reserve this capacity from this natural gas resource. SVCE, you get to count this toward your obligation. So for the most part, that's what we do right now. It's natural gas. There's nothing amazing about it. These natural gas facilities operate basically on a 24/7 basis. They're always available. They're not subject to whether the sun is shining or the wind is blowing or a drought or anything like that. So they're quite reliable. But our ability to rely on these types of resources, just like hydro, will change over time. Because they're being kind of phased out. Because they produce emissions, they're not clean. There's no real room for them in the future under kind of an RPS or 100% clean structure for energy use. And so a lot of load serving entities are not committing to keeping these resources on, just like us as a CCA, to keeping these resources on for the long term. We're not signing long-term contracts for these resources. We're basically buying them on a year-to-year basis. And because of that, the cost of them have been going up every year, because the developers or the owners of these resources really need to have the cash flow to make sure that they can keep these resources on. So that's one major thing is, our accounting system right now is quite simple and we meet it with natural gas. But now we fast forward to 2030 and we look at some of the discussions that are being had and the proposals that are being made to reform resource adequacy to account for all the renewable energy that we're going to be putting on the grid by 2030. And so there's a concept and there's a proposal out there right now to consider what they call a slice a day. So, and what this basically means is that we will have to demonstrate that we have sufficient resources to meet our load on an hourly basis. Now, we haven't had to do that this far. And so it's very much different than what we do today, which we only demonstrate once a month. And so the graph on the right-hand side of your screen shows theoretically, if we had all our PPA resources and we procured what was required of us under the midterm reliability procurement order, this is the stack, this shows the stack of resources that we'd have every hour of the day for a similar typical summer September day in 2030. So you can see we kind of get really close to meeting all of our hourly needs with clean resources or non-fossil fuel-based resources. There's still some white area, and how that white area is going to be met, we haven't figured that out yet. The hope would be that there would be still natural gas resources available for us to kind of supplement the spaces where the clean resources don't provide clean energy, but we get pretty close. But this will create its own set of challenges. Now we have a bunch of resources that could shut down in one moment because the sun doesn't shine or the wind doesn't blow. And so they're not as reliable as the resources that we've been relying on in the past. And even with storage, while it does make a difference, storage can only dispatch energy if it's been charged. And so if solar energy is not available to charge the battery, or wind's not available to charge the battery, something has to charge those batteries. And so it becomes a little bit more of a complicated grid to manage in 2030. But we're excited to see that we're not that far off from being able to meet this requirement. And that's a good thing for us. I think we've positioned the portfolio very well with all of the storage that we've added to our solar resources at the board's direction. And because we added geothermal to our portfolio. I think we're in a very good position to be able to meet this requirement if this becomes the new lay of the land. So I'll stop for a second and see if there's any questions. Director Larson.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm curious about the cost, like looking at the 2030 graph. So we are close in terms of capacity, but what is the cost of that power relative to what else is available? Because ultimately, we are concerned about equity and affordability of our rates. And yeah, can you speak to the cost part of that?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, and we haven't attributed a cost to this yet, and this is what we're working through now. Part of the reason that we haven't done the analysis on the cost yet is because first we had to understand what the order was, like what is the megawatt, and it's not that we have an alternative choice. This is a mandate. We're being told we have to procure these resources. And so it's our job to procure these resources in the least cost way, try to find the best resources that meet the compliance obligation. But it's not like we could not buy these resources. Not buying them will subject us to penalties and other things. But we will, when we go through the IRP process for this next round, we will be looking at the cost of a particular portfolio versus something that maybe is slightly different to see, what are the cost implications of doing just the minimum midterm reliability requirement, just the minimum amount of procurement that's being ordered, or if we went above and beyond that and procured more long duration storage or more solar plus storage or more wind, or if we procured less hydro, or if we decided to add some natural gas resources into our portfolio. Now that could be cheaper, but then it has emissions associated with it. And so that gets back to the original questions, like what do we want to define SVCE in terms of a clean CCA? Was there room for natural gas in our portfolio in the future? Is there room for emissions in our portfolio? So it all kind of comes back to the policy about what we want to be. But yeah, we intend to do that exercise. We're gearing up to do that in the next few months. And that'll also be the basis of some of our workshops as well, if we take them that far.
Thank you.
Yeah. I don't see everybody, Garish, so I don't know if there are any other questions.
I don't see any other hands, and
Okay.
just being mindful of time, do you want to finish up the rest of the
Sure.
slides, and then we'll take questions at the end.
Sure. So we have made quite a bit of progress on meeting the midterm reliability requirements through CC Power. We're wrapping up negotiating one long duration storage contract with Tumbleweed. This was brought to the executive committee last month. We hope to bring it to the board in January. And then we have another contract behind that would meet our long duration storage requirements under this order. For firm clean resources via CC Power, we've issued an RFP. Bids are due next week for those resources. This includes geothermal and biomass. And we are in the process of formulating our next RFO. We're going to be partnering with Sonoma Clean Power and Central Coast Community Energy to meet the other portions of that of the MTR requirements, which include standalone storage and additional solar plus storage. And then if all goes well, we hope to bring those resources to the board in summer of 2022 for consideration. Next slide. So now just kind of switching gears onto what we're doing right now with respect to the power purchase agreements that the board has approved and have been executed. We have 13 PPAs that will be coming online over the next 2 years plus. And so those are listed here in this timeline. If you go to the next slide. Just to give you a quick update on some of the efforts on bringing these online. The first project is a recurrent slate project. This is solar plus storage. We have been receiving test energy on this project. Test energy is kind of the energy that it's going into the grid, but the project's still not completely developed. And so we hope to have the project fully online by the first week of January. And there's been slight delays in this project, mostly due to some work that had to be done on PG&E's side to upgrade the transmission line between the project and PG&E's transmission system. So that's been delayed slightly. And then the next project after that is the Big Bow Solar Project. This is also solar plus storage. This project too was delayed, mostly due to some supply chain issues and the developer's inability to get all the equipment to the site on time. We hope that this project becomes fully operational in the March timeframe of next year. The COSO project, it's a geothermal project, it's an existing project. We start to get delivery of that resource on January 1st. There's really no development risk around this one since it's an existing resource. Ormat is the second geothermal project. This is a new project. They're on track to start delivering energy in March to us. And then we have the AES Mountain View Wind project, which is a repowered project. We're taking a bunch of old wind turbines down and replacing them with more efficient wind turbines. And so construction started on this project in August, and it's on track to deliver by its COD date. And then another solar plus storage project broke ground in November. And so that's the Robert Bush project. And we'll be getting performance updates or project development updates from them very soon since they just broke ground. And then this is only highlighting kind of the ones that are either have started construction or are close to being COD. But in addition to this, we have several other projects. For many of those projects, we're hearing from the developers that there are delays expected, mostly due to labor shortages, supply chain delivery issues. And so this is a common theme throughout California, probably throughout the US. And I think a lot of it was due to COVID-19 and some of the effects that has had. I think these are going to be lingering issues that we'll continue to see for at least another year or two, but we hope that they're temporary and that after that, it's not going to be such a big problem. The next slide. We're just sharing some pictures for your pleasure here of the projects in their different state of construction. We have on the top left, the Slate Solar Plus Storage project. And then on the bottom right, the Big Bow Solar project. You're only seeing the solar panels on both of these. Next slide. On the top left up here, you have the geothermal project, which is essentially done. It's just not online yet. And then you have that Mountain View repowered wind project on the bottom right. So you're seeing the old wind turbines in the background because the new ones aren't up yet. Next slide. And then this is the Robert Bush project that just started construction in November. So you're not seeing a whole lot here, but just kind of the foundational work. Next slide.
I had a quick question on that last one on the wind. Are we looking at what the concrete is that's going to be poured underground to make sure that the turbine doesn't fall over? Is that what that huge structure was?
That looks like rebar and stuff, right? To reinforce the foundation. I would hope they don't fall over. I'm not in the construction business, but I know that there's a lot of permitting.
Not this slide, one back.
One back.
Yeah, see that I kept looking at that going, what the heck is that?
Yeah, it does look like rebar, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the base.
That's the base of probably one wind turbine is what it looks
Wow.
Yep.
Yeah. And the new wind turbines they're putting in there are pretty tall and very efficient in terms of what they can generate. I don't remember the actual statistics on how many. I think that I'll get you that number for a future presentation. The number of much smaller number of turbines are going up in this facility, repowered here, to create the same amount of capacity.
Thank you.
I guess they don't want the wind turbine to be blown away by the wind.
or the wind turbines create a lot of wind. So this is the end. This is my last slide, and it's really just to kind of leave you with some things to think about and things that we'll be addressing in coming workshops and discussions that we have with the board as we bring resources or integrated resource plans to the board for consideration. But there are many pathways to 100% clean in 2045, and so just to remind everyone, SB 100, which was passed, I believe, 2 years ago, sets a 100% clean goal for 2045 for the whole state of California. And so the state has yet to define what it means to be 100% clean. They haven't defined if it's an annual thing or if it's an hourly thing. They haven't even defined exactly what would qualify towards 100% clean, but there is a goal out there to be 100% clean by 2045. And so there are lots of discussions about how we're actually going to get there and what is it and how do we get there and maintain reliability and also be an affordable grid. And so these are the questions that the policymakers are grappling with right now, and even the legislators are also grappling with right now. And so when we look at it at SVCE, there's a lot of questions that we have about, for ourselves, what does this mean for us? Like, what is the role of natural gas going to mean for SVCE? It's right now the machine that makes renewables reliable because they allow for integration. But if natural gas goes away, what does that mean for reliability and our RPS and clean goals? And then what is that resource adequacy reform going to look like for us? And if it is a 24-hour slice a day, how well does our portfolio perform under that new requirement? And then, as I mentioned before, what is the role of large hydro in meeting our overall clean goals? If we continue to rely on hydro resources that are less and less dependable and more expensive, and perhaps even not allowed under certain kind of requirements, then how do we meet our 100% clean goals? Should we be looking at only renewable resources? And if we look at only renewable resources, do we commit everything under long-term contracts since we expect them to be cheaper price, or should we have a mix of long-term and short-term contracts? And then how do we integrate distributed energy resources, whether it's rooftop solar with storage, or any other kind of behind-the-meter resource, such as demand resource or energy efficiency, into our planning? This gets back to a lot of the questions that Director Elahi had in the beginning, and like, how are these resources being factored into our load, and therefore our planning and procurement efforts in the future? What are the impacts of electrification going to be here at SVCE and in California in general? Again, there's a lot of talk about electrifying transportation, electrifying everything, and doubling down on decarbonization. But how do you achieve those and still achieve your clean energy goals and do this in a reliable and affordable way? So these are things that we care very much about because of our mission, but the state is also looking at it too. And then we can do everything, or we could try to do everything that we think makes sense as a community for SVCE, much like what we did in the past with the geothermal and with the pairing of storage plus solar before it was mandated. But then the reality is that we will face additional procurement orders. And those additional procurement orders may not align with what we've already procured. And so we face the risk and the uncertainty of having over-procured resources in our portfolio, and perhaps even stranding some resources. So how do we deal with that risk of procurement orders? And the other big risk is direct access, which could be both a good thing and a bad thing. On the one hand, we do have this risk that we could lose load, maybe significant load in the future. But then on the other hand, could we position ourselves to help our customers who are actually eligible or willing or able to go direct access to stay with us because we have alignment with their clean energy goals? And how do we meet that kind of challenge? And then certainly, what is the cost of all of this? If we want to be 100% clean, what is the cost of that? And what is the cost of it if we look at it from an annual basis or a 24/7 basis? If we try to eliminate emissions in every hour of the day versus just on an annual basis, what are the different costs of meeting those same or different kind of objectives? And so happy to take questions or consider maybe solutions, but these are just some of the things that I think we need to talk about and plan around as well. So with that, I don't have any other slides.
I see Vice Chair's hand up.
Thank you. This is a humdinger of a discussion. The title, the topic here is greenhouse gas reduction goals, affordably and reliably. And this is sort of where I think you're asking us to keep in mind going forward that we've had the goal of using large hydro to meet our GHG reduction, but large hydro doesn't, we're buying something that's already existing. It isn't actually decarbonizing as a power source. So you haven't specifically talked about that, but I think that's an important aspect of this, and it ties into the earlier questions. I think of, the wind, where are we going to be thinking more wind? Are we really ending up focused on solar? What other innovative ideas can we encourage to produce power that can be power reliably in the 24/7 scenario? So I'm not coming up with any answers. I'm just saying, reading this. This is a big deal for the future and next year's discussion on how the role of our decarbonization also fits into coming up with greenhouse gas reductions that, for example, may not want to rely on large hydro because that's an existing GHG reduction source as opposed to creating new sources that decarbonize. I don't know if everybody understood what I was getting at there, but this is I guess this is a lot to.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. That if we don't use large hydro, and we already have to do a lot of solar because we're being essentially mandated to do solar, then what is the next thing, and what could we realistically bring online to meet that requirement?
Yeah.
And that's another big question. It's like there's a lot of talk about hydrogen and offshore wind, but there's not the commercial viability of those resources just isn't there yet. We're not seeing those in our procurement efforts when we go out to buy things.
Right. So I may be oversimplifying here, but, and you know me, I always like graphics. I love the idea of understanding how our large hydro addresses our greenhouse gas reduction in terms of our labeling of our product, and then how other scenarios could replace it.
Yeah.
There's
And what?
and putting into that the reliability that we've also spoken of, and you just did. Is it available in what time frame?
Mm-hmm.
And at what cost?
Right.
And at what reliability?
Yeah.
I think we need to it's a big load. I need them. I just think that might help people understand why we're talking about this now. Right.
And then just to talk about large hydro a little bit too. So any resource you can buy in a different ways. What we're trying to do with our procurement on large hydro, and we actually did do this with the recent procurement, is we're trying to make it a more useful product in a way. So we're pairing it with reliability. We're requiring resource adequacy to be attached to the large hydro. And we're requiring that the large hydro essentially come from specific resources and then has the transmission path associated with it, so that we can actually demonstrate it, use it as a product to meet resource adequacy. So it can meet different objectives, and sometimes it meets those multiple objectives in a more cost-effective way than doing it through other ways. So when we look at any resource that we procure, we look at to see at what objective does it meet, and can it meet more than one objective? And that's important for us to consider as well.
And that might mean more of a matrix way of looking at it, right? That's what you're
Right.
is understanding the value from different perspectives and how it all comes together. Yeah.
Right.
Thanks.
Rennie?
Thank you. So building on what Liz was saying, if we think about it in terms of sub-optimizing and not wanting to sub-optimize, as Director Gibbons mentioned, buying hydro is a resource that somebody's going to use. If we buy it, then we've sub-optimized and say, we've reduced greenhouse gases. Well, somebody else is not using it and maybe using a fossil fuel instead. So that's what I think we want to be careful about just sub-optimizing ourselves, because our goal is really to fight climate change and reduce greenhouse gases globally. So just to put the idea in your head, large hydro is now costing us, what, 4 or 5 times what it used to when we first put that plan in place. If, let's just say devil's advocate, if we bought gas instead and we let somebody else use the large hydro, there's probably no difference in the amount of total greenhouse gases going into the atmosphere. We can't, claim that ours is as clean as it was, but somebody else gets to claim more. But we may save a lot of money, which we could then use in another way to reduce greenhouse gases. So for example, the grid already is mandated to go clean anyway. But what's not been mandated to go clean is existing built environment, or even sort of future built environment. So if we took the money we saved, even though we haven't changed really the total greenhouse gases, and put it into moving people off of fossil fuel buildings, for example, or off of fossil fuel cars, are we actually making a better gain in fighting climate change and reducing greenhouse gases by not sub-optimizing and saying, we've bought all this green power that we actually made sure somebody else couldn't buy instead? I understand that's a little bit of a complicated argument, but I thought I would try to throw it out there.
Yeah. Yeah, it's complicated. I think the concept that we're talking about here is referred to as resource shuffling. And this is something that we're all aware of, that, are we making a difference or are we not making a difference? And this is an argument that's been happening since the creation of a renewable energy certificate, and the different types of RECs that you could buy. Is a PCC1 better than a PCC2, better than a PCC3? I don't know all the answers. I know that there are people that are working on trying to answer the question about whether large hydro makes a difference or doesn't make a difference. And I think it sometimes comes down to as simple as whether that resource is surplus to a grid or not surplus to a grid. And so if it's surplus to what the requirements are of the incumbent area, then what happens to it? Does it just not generate and it doesn't have any value? And by us paying it, does it keep it a fossil fuel resource for actually coming online at some point? So these are really good questions. These are ones that I think that many of the CCAs in the state are looking at. Right now, just it counts towards meeting the way that you look at SB 100, it will count towards meeting the SB 100 requirements. And so then for us, it becomes a question if we have to be 100% clean on an annual basis, because that's the metric that's handed down to us by the state. And our alternatives are large hydro versus long-term renewables, or just short-term renewables that are also existing resources. what makes more sense from an economic standpoint and what checks more boxes off on our requirements. And I think that's the right way to approach it, is making sure that we try to minimize our costs while still meeting our objectives from a procurement standpoint.
Director Alahi.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't know if this is going to go back in a circle, but I think we are almost, listening to everything, it looks like we're a startup that's going to be in a startup phase for 30 years. So we're one of those unique startups that's going to be still trying to figure it out. And there's a lot of graphs and statistics, and you almost get the feeling that some of the statistics can be interpreted whichever way somebody wants to interpret them. You know, we're reducing greenhouse gases, yet we're making somebody else buy more non-greenhouse gas material. And ultimately, we may, going back to the circle is, should we do something, and the money that we save by, say, buying gas products could be used, for example, to give incentives. For example, right now there are incentives. If you buy an oven, you get a dishwasher with it free. So similarly, it could be an incentive. You buy an electric heat pump, you get a solar energy discount or a solar energy panel that goes with your solar thing, so that the cost of that is reduced. It might even be that solar energy panels are being discouraged because ultimately, if the homeowner is selling energy back to the utilities, they don't want to buy that and pay any price for that. So I think that really needs to be explored as to the whole solar rooftop and solar energy equation, and how that can be subsidized to have homeowners put solar energy batteries, where long-term wise it really will give you greenhouse-free gases and greenhouse-free energy. So maybe we need to put some real resources into figuring that out. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other directors with questions? If not, I'm going to open this up to public comment. If you're in the attendee box and would like to speak, please hit the raise hand button or *9 on the phone, and we'll start with Mr. Carney. Let's see, should be able to unmute. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Monica, for an excellent presentation. Could you put slide 5 back up, please? While we're waiting for her to do that, I'd just like to say, here's a metaphor for what Monica and her team are going through. She's set out on a long hike, and it turned out that the first part of the hike was more or less downhill. But now she's reached the part where the hill starts climbing, and it's climbing quite rapidly. And the CPUC keeps dumping things in her backpack that she has to carry. Like, here's another 20 pounds of batteries, and I may give you another 20 pounds pretty soon. And oh, by the way, you need to get to the top of the hill much faster than we had previously told you. I hope that's not a problem, Monica. You can do that, right? Okay, let's see. Yes, so we see a gap starting in 2025. The top of the bars don't reach the load forecast. I think to a large degree, that's simply because we know that there will be procurement of solar and storage and maybe other things. So don't worry too much about the shortfall. SVCE will contract with other vendors to fill that up. But what I'd like to mention particularly is if you look at 2030, there are cities in our region who currently intend to be carbon neutral by 2030. Most cities are following the state mandate. They expect to be carbon neutral by 2045. But I know that Mountain View is considering a carbon neutrality by 2030 goal. And so for that to happen, the electricity that SVCE provides, at least to Mountain View, would have to be 100% carbon free. And last year, the last year for which statistics are widely available, SVCE was the cleanest utility in Northern California, and not by just a little bit. We were nearly 100 times cleaner than the dirtiest utility. And sad to say, that was Pioneer Clean Energy. A CCA was the highest emitting utility, load serving entity in Northern California. And about half of all CCAs emitted more greenhouse gases last year than PG&E did on their base plan. And PG&E's solar plan was a zero emission plan. So CCAs are losing their claim to be greener, and they're also not doing too well on the claim to be cheaper. And so recognizing all the difficulties in Monica's last slide, the things that keep her up at night, I look forward to these workshops early next year so the board can really integrate their city's plans for being carbon neutral and SVCE's plans for providing the clean electricity that makes that possible. I think I'll stop right there, but again, I want to reemphasize that I think that Monica has done a wonderful job providing the background information to help you understand the challenging trade-offs that exist and that SVCE will have to solve over the next few years.
Thank you. Any other members of the public wishing to comment? I don't see any other hands. Bring it back to the board and ask the clerk, were there any public comments received earlier on this item?
There were none, Chair.
Thank you. And then we'll go to our CEO.
Thank you, Chair Abekoga. So very good feedback from board members today. We appreciate it. We're going to use the feedback we get to design our workshops for the first quarter of 2022. But I want to emphasize a point which hopefully will bridge what Monica was talking about and the comment from Bruce Carney. Yes, on paper, we are the cleanest, but that's not the whole story. We happen to be the cleanest because of the report card we are using. And that report card is not necessarily the right report card to use. The state is moving in a different direction. Because to really get lower emissions, you have to be moving towards tracking emissions on an hourly basis. So yes, we started a certain way through annual balancing, and that's how many of our cities, that's how we measure ourselves, but that has to change. And so the fundamental kind of questions and comments that have been brought up by the Board of Trade-offs, right? Because do we change the report card over a period of time maybe and use potential maybe savings we get from that to reduce emissions even more? Those are the kinds of things we'll talk to you about in these workshops. And this is something that we are all working on. The state's also looking at this, but we want to be leaders in the clean energy space. That is our mission, to reduce emissions, not just on the electricity side, but also on the buildings and transportation side. So really appreciate the feedback, and we'll have these, we'll tee up these discussions for February and March, and we'll also bring some of the outlines to the executive committee before we get to the workshops. Thank you.
Thank you, Girish, and thank you, Monica, for very in-depth presentation. It was a lot. It's going to take some time, I think, for at least for me to absorb it all. But I look forward to the workshops that in the new year on that. So with that, is there anything else on this item from directors? I don't see any hands, so we will close this item and move on to item. Thank you again, Monica, Girish. We'll move on to item 4, which is an information update on the board elections, and we have Girish presenting. Did you unmute yourself? There you go.
Sorry about that,
No
searching on the
worries.
screen. So this is an information update, Chair Abekoga and members of the board, on the elections. And when we go to the next slide, we want to tell you about the selection process and timeline. Next slide. So as per the tradition and then the procedures that have been adopted by the board, here's the process that we've used in past years, and we've kind of replicated the process for this year. We would send an email for letters of interest for chair and vice chair. We'll send that out by Friday. At the January 12th board meeting, regular board meeting, the board would select the chair, vice chair, and executive committee. And after that, we'll have a committee matrix worksheet distributed to the board that Friday, January 14th, and committee assignments would be made at the February 19th board meeting. Next slide. So this is essentially what I just told you, more in a graphical form, that we have a certain process that we'll utilize. And I'll actually stop here. In your slide presentation, you'll see we have one more slide on the actual committees and who's on the committees today. So we'll be sending something out to you on Friday. So with that, be happy to take any questions, and just note for the entire board, the executive committee did review this at their last meeting and proposed we present it to the board as I have right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions from board members? If not, I'm gonna go to the public. Are there any members of the public wishing to speak on this item? Please raise your hand or hit *9 on the phone. I don't see any, so I will close public comment. Did we receive any public comment earlier? Clerk Roberts?
We did not, Chair Abikoka.
Great, thank you. Then I will close public comment, bring it back to the board, and I see Director Armendariz' hand.
Good evening, Chair. Maybe I missed it, but Garesh said that names will be accepted for chair and co-chair. Does that include nominations or just folks nominating themselves?
In the past, I believe it's been letters of interest, so it would be from the individual interested in serving in the either the chair or vice chair position. But we also will take nominations from the floor at our January meeting, if I remember correctly.
Okay, great. That's my only question. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments on the process? And encourage folks to please send in your letters of interest. We will look forward to strong leadership in the coming year. And with that, then, if there are no other questions or comments, we will close this item. Thank you very much. And then we will now move on to board member announcements and direction on future agenda items. Is there anything from board members? Oh, yes, I see Vice Chair.
I just wanted to say that I attended the December 1st Cal CCA conference. It was remote. They had a series of panels, and I won't do justice to the panelists or the discussions other than to say that I'm glad I listened. I always come away from those better informed about what's going on in our industry, and basically what's coming up and how different people are dealing with the issues. So I thought the panels were well structured and very, very good discussion. So I'm glad I went.
Thank you, Vice Chair. And Director Tyson.
Let me just build on that, since I attended the same thing. And I would say that actually sometimes the presentations left me a little wondering, where's the beef? Just how are we really going to get there? But absolutely the star for me was the afternoon session, decarbonization, everything, with our very own CEO as a moderator. And I tell you, I am motivated to go up to Santa Rosa to see that demonstration thing. And I guess they have beer for sale right nearby. It sounds like quite the good day.
Sounds like a field trip in the making there.
Okay, I'll carpool with you. We just drive our.
Great. Thank you. Anyone else? Well, if not, since this is our last meeting of the year, I just want to take a moment to thank everyone, our staff, of course, our top-notch staff, and then this board has been an amazing board. I also want to thank Director Ellenberg. I learned this is her last meeting. And so thank you very much for your dedicated service on the board. We will miss you, but I'm glad that we will still have you as an alternate. And so, yes, thank you to all of you. This has been quite a year. I didn't expect us to still be virtual at this point, but all in all, I think it went quite well, very smoothly. Thanks to all the staff for I know it takes a lot of preparation for these board meetings and coordination. And so I want to thank you all. I just am it's been an honor to be on this board. I find it's someone else mentioned this, but one of my most enjoyable assignments with such a board with individuals so intelligent, thoughtful, and engaged as you all. So, and I want to thank our vice chair for her service this year. It's really been an honor. I think we've achieved a lot. I know we'll continue to keep doing so. And so thank you all for your commitment to our mission. And I just want to wish you all wonderful holidays and a bright 2022, hopefully a fully open one. And hopefully we'll get to see each other in person sometime soon. But please take care, stay healthy, and have wonderful holidays. And we will see you in the new year. Thank you.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays. I also wanted to thank our chair, Monica. The first year that I came on this board when I knew nothing, and I know a little bit more than nothing now, I guess. She was the chair and did a remarkable job and convinced me that this was the board to be on. And this year has been complicated. The staff has left the most complicated thing for last. So thank you, Monica, for that. But I think it worked out well. So happy holidays to all of you. Wishing you all the best. Thank you.
Happy holidays, folks.
Happy holidays, and we are adjourned at 8:37. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Vice Chair.
Thank you. Good night.